Hello, everyone, and welcome to Threat Hunting. Well, I have to say, I'm pretty excited about today's episode because we're going to take a look at a fairly common remote access Trojan, one that for a long time I worked at trying to identify because there are so many variants. So we're going to look at NanoCore, and we'll take a look at our visibility, what we could tell, and if we had enough visibility to truly identify what we were looking at. So let's get started. All right, so we will start with just the facts. Okay, so we know it's a remote access tool. It's a backdoor. It gives a full interaction with the user system, so that could be audio recordings, video recordings, browser history, browser interaction, and it can often be bundled with other software as social engineering to trick you to run it. As is the case with this one. So before we open up these logs, I went to hybrid analysis and just picked the top one off the top. So let's take a look at what we have. We're going to start with the PCAP, and then we'll kind of take a look at the sysmon logs. What was kind of funny was when I was running it, well, it's a RAD, right? So as I was running it, they were profiling my system to see if they were being analyzed. And we'll see some of that traffic, some of those events. And then they kept just trying to shut down my system. I'm not entirely sure why, but it was interesting. So it's kind of fun. Let's start with start with Wireshark. All right. So the packet capture doesn't show a whole lot of information, but it does show some interesting information. Probably right off the bat, we see this ngrok.io address. It's kind of fascinating. And we see some TCP traffic and some lookups. And quite honestly, that's about it. There was no SMTP. There were not even certificate names to look at. So let's start with what stood out. What the heck is ngrok? Well, ngrok turns out to be a legitimate tool, and it allows someone on their machine to open up that machine to anyone who wants to look at it based on a URL. And that's a tunneling software, right? Totally legitimate purposes for DevOps. That being said, it's a tunneling software. So if it is being used malicious, that means someone can tunnel in and out of your environment if they got you to run the software. So we see that. So right away that screams, oh my gosh, we have a Trojan, right? Going back to our PCAP, I think we should follow some of this TCP traffic and see what we can figure out. Okay, when we do that, when we right click follow TCP stream, what we end up with is this. Okay, so some things right off the bat. It might be using HTTP, but there are no headers. There's nothing that is noticeable or recognizable, and that should kind of be a clue that we might be looking at C2 communication. Could you figure out what kind of C2? Probably not by yourself. I certainly couldn't. I'm sure there are some pretty awesome people out there because be like, oh my goodness, I know what this is. This is NanoCore. So I have to rely sometimes on outside tools to help me out. And one of them is Suricata. And that is an incredible tool with free rules that get put out by emerging threats. Let me show you what some of those rules look like. They're a little intense when you first look at them, but we can kind of take them apart, and I'll lead you through the first part. So we are under emergingthreats.net, open Suricata rules and Trojans. And I did a find for Nano because I'm wondering about NanoCore. So that's my hunch. But let's see if we can find anything that supports that. So what I'm going to look at here is that we've got a D size, and that's talking about the data packet, like how much data. And this says about 60 bytes. Content means that's what's actually inside the packet. So those, if we come back over to Wireshark, right? So that's here. The content is going to be looking through these hex values or bytes. Now let's get to the actual rule, which is fascinating. The first part says there should be, or there could be, right, those hex values and the first 5 values. Okay, so just for fun, let's see if we can find it. So we're going to copy it, head back over to Wireshark. As you can see, I already kind of started. And there we go. Here we go. In the first 5 of this communication, we've got that value. Oh, here we go. This is more accurate. This is in the first 5. So we have a hit. All right. So that gives credence to the fact that this could be NanoCore. Now let's move over and take a look at our host logs to get a feel for what else is going on. My goodness, I love this stuff. This is so much fun. All right, so, okay. Now the EVTX files I'll put online, of course, so you can take a look at them. And so we've got sysmon, we've got application, security, and system. Well, I'm going to start with the sysmon. And I'll be honest, I wasn't super thrilled about what came up. And I think I can fix this with some maybe a configuration file, but I'm going to zoom this out a little bit so we can see it better. And okay. Well, one thing I know for sure is that when I started the file, because I downloaded it, right? It turned into this FS limit crack. Okay, so this was a bundled Trojan. It was pretending to be this F society limit. And instead, it turned out to be, or also have NanoCore as part of it. Some things to look at. App data local, very popular places to begin. And we see it also dropped a secondary file, Java. I don't think that usually belongs there. Also, what is interesting is that later it renamed itself. We can notice because we've got the same hash value here and here, it renamed it as PCI Manager. Kind of fascinating. So those are the known malicious files. We can also, I'm going to go in this just a little bit farther, and I think if I do that, how good, you can see better now. Okay. Let's do a group by command line, just because that's always useful. Okay, so that was a lot there. Let's see if I can make that a little smaller. We're going to select property, just the name. It'll give us a place to start. So I'm going to scroll all the way up. Okay, so here's me running the file. Here's it running itself, extracting that. Now let's take a look at interesting stuff. It runs Task Manager. Makes me think about scheduled tasks, maybe persistence. Scrolling down farther, quite honestly, I don't know what the make cab was about and whether or not it was part of NanoCore. If you take a look at the EVTX and have suggestions, please let me know. I didn't dig really very far into that. We notice a a lot of SVC hosts running a lot of network systems. This was fascinating that we've got OpenSSH. So this particular software installed OpenSSH and I think a Cygwin server on it. It also does a check for a registry key called npcap, which is what network packet software uses. So I think it was checking if it was being watched. And it was. I was running Wireshark. So I had a little bit of trying to figure stuff out. There's some more registry looking. Okay, and just some other stuff that I don't quite understand all the way, but I'm learning as well. But those jumped out at me. Now let's take a look at some of the, there's another fun one to look at. Let's see if I can pull it up. Oh, no, that's good. We'll go there. We can dive into other stuff. Let's take a look at the security logs. I'm going to go to copy. And now, so here I just pulled out the event logs, and just so we can get event IDs really quick. So just to give us a heads up of some things that are going on, 4905 is unregistering a security event source related to logging, which is interesting to find out. 4672 is about giving special privileges to a new logon. 4624 was an account was successfully logged in, and 4648 was using explicit credentials. So when you dig into these logs, what you're going to notice is that the user on the box, I think it was just called IE user, the malware took that user that it was running under, elevated it to system, and gave it special privileges so it could run other things. It was kind of a privilege escalation that it did. I'm not sure exactly what exploit it used to bump up to system, but once it was there, then it could continue to do things. So that's interesting. And then it logged in with explicit credentials. So kind of interesting, something to think about. Moving down, also this 4647 is when the malicious actor shut down my system. And we're going to take a look at what that looked like. Okay, here it is. Kind of fun. So we saw earlier that Java was a malicious program. So acting under that process as the elevated user with special permissions, they tried to shut down the box. So that was, like I said, kind of interesting. Those were the most interesting things that I observed in the logs. Now, I'm going to take a step back and look at some research on NanoCore, because right now we don't have anything definitive. You know, we've got ngrok, we've got suspicious user account manipulation, and we have some possible checking to see if it's being watched. All should raise red flags. So if we go for the MITRE, they profile it, which is lovely. So if you want to take a look at some things that NanoCore can do, MITRE is a great place to go. Another place that does pretty nice profiling is AnyRun. And what I thought was interesting when I was reading this was that the way AnyRun profiles whether or not you are dealing with NanoCore. Oh, you're in here somewhere. I know it. So if this is talking about MS build, I didn't see a lot of that. But here's something that caught my eye. So AnyRun classifies it using Suricata rules, which we looked at, and we did see a match there. But it also looks for this run.dat file. Well, since I still had the virtual machine up, I couldn't not take a look. So here's what I found. All right, we'll get back to those other ones in a second. But if I went under that app.roaming, there was a run.dat file that was created right at the same time that the file was executed. So there's our smoking gun. NanoCore makes a run.dat file. Online research can show you that's a pretty common indicator, but look at the visibility that it requires. You have to see host logs being created. Now, my sysmon configuration, I don't have it set up to catch file creation. That'll be remedied for sure, but it was there. Also of note, I wanted to point out on the box, the PCAP, after I shut off the network connection, it was trying to still get to ngrok, okay, that address. And look at this 127.001 to 127.001. That's a pretty good indicator you're dealing with tunneling software, trying to get out. So kind of a nice thing to pay attention to. All right, so I'm all about hypothesis. So let's think about anomalies. What was unique about this rat sample that we had visibility into or that we learned about? Okay, so here's one idea. If we look at the PIDs of the processes, the malicious ones, the FS limit crack, I think, and Java, we can see that they invoked themselves or they ran themselves. And that's kind of a fun thing to go back and check the parent and child processes, and you can see that happening. And we can also see that it created itself again in a different directory, PCI manager. And it's a pretty good clue. You might be dealing with something malicious. Is it a rat or not? That's going to take further look. And I think the network logs really, really help show that for me. All right, now looking at our TTPs, NanoCore. Okay, so if we read about it, it tends to do registry run keys, tends to do scheduled tasks. Now, in my samples, neither one of those were observed. There were no persistence under the run key, and there were no new scheduled tasks. Now, that being said, I think it was because it knew it was being monitored. So, wanted to kind of evade detection a little bit. But we did see the run.dat file, and that was our smoking gun for this one for sure. IOC hunts? Rats are hard, right? Because every domain could be its own IOC, right? They're kind of one-off sometimes. But in this case, we had NGRock, which is a development tool to create tunneling out from a local host to the internet. That's pretty suspicious. I've seen that and alerted on it before, and yeah, it surprised people. Also, app data local. In the sysmon logs, you will see that Java was making TCP connections outbound, right? And so if we see a process from app data local trying to connect outbound, that's a pretty good chance that we've got some malicious Trojan activity. Well, gosh, this was a whole lot of fun to do and share. And I know it was a lot of it was pretty fast. So take a look at the EVTXs that I put up, as well as the PCAPs. And if you have knowledge, if you have a better way to find NanoCore, if you have some things that I missed, please share, because there is so much. There's so much out there. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one.